On today's show, we are just dipping our toes into the offseason when it comes to the Milwaukee Bucks, but we understand there is big picture stuff to talk about. And sometimes you got to get out of the Milwaukee bubble and get the national perspective. And I said Howard Beck is going to join us. He is here today. We're going to talk about the continued fallout from the first round loss to Miami and then projecting forward about some of the moves or perhaps lack of flexibility this team has to make major moves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday and also find my work over at ESPN. And as always, we thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen of every single weekday, even through the offseason. It might be a long offseason for the Bucks or a longer one than we thought was going to go down, but we're still going to have this show, and it might be one of the more fascinating off seasons we've seen for the Bucks, certainly in the Mike Budenholzer era. So we appreciate the support. Subscribe, drop a like, and comment, and all those things on whatever platform you're watching. It's free to do so, but it really does help us in the big picture as well, which we appreciate. Now, alongside me today, a man that if you've followed basketball and you've partaken in the media industry and the content, then you know this man very well. Howard Beck from New York Times, Bleacher Report, Sports Illustrated, a whole bunch of major publications, and now doing some great stuff with the Locked On Podcast Network, which I know all the hosts absolutely appreciate. Howard, it's good to catch up. Now, as we were scheduling this, I will say we were talking about when we were going to do this show, when we were going to fit it in, and at first we were discussing, well, we'll probably need to fit it in between second round games for the Bucks now. So this isn't the conversation I thought we were going to have, but nonetheless, I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
Appreciate that. Excited to have the conversation as well. Kane, thanks for having me. And no, this is not the timing or circumstances or consequences or anything else that I thought we would be discussing at this point in the postseason, but here we are.
So if that's not a bad way to start, because obviously as this first round series with Miami unfolded, the reality or the possibility that the Bucks were going to get eliminated, it ramped up pretty quickly. I'm curious, as you were watching this series though, did it feel like it was getting more shocking by the game, or did you feel early in this series that there was a legitimate and very, very real possibility that this was the way it was going to play out?
Never thought this was a realistic possibility. I mean, listen, I have great regard for the Miami Heat. And, you know, we talk about and sometimes joke about hashtag Heat culture because it can be a little bit overused. It's a little too precious sometimes. However, there is something real to that, right? We just saw it again, frankly, in game 2 against the Knicks. They lost that game. But there they were with no Jimmy Butler, no Tyler Hero, no Victor Oladipo. It's Bam Adebayo and a bunch of dudes, and the game is still going down to the wire, and the Knicks were at full strength. That speaks to Heat culture. Like there is something there. So we should never dismiss them, even in a down year. And look, they did have to come in through the play-in. They were an 8th seed. And while I thought they were better than their record indicated, which is the case for a lot of teams this season, oddly. I did not think for a minute that they had it in them to pull off the upset against the Bucks. And I tend to think of what happened as more, if you're going to split this thing, it's at least as much or more an indictment of the Bucks as it is credit to the Heat. So when the Heat were, or when the Bucks were looking a little wobbly in this series, my belief all along was, because I have a lot of faith in teams that are established at the Bucks level, that, you know, all right, look, Giannis is out a couple of games. All right, he's got a back injury, whatever. But if Giannis is on the floor, they're going to pull this out. They'll find their way. I did not for a minute think they were going to end up losing in 5, and with Giannis still playing at a pretty high level while they're going down. So, no, I'm still shocked. I'm still shocked that we're sitting here today talking about a second round in which the Heat and the Knicks are battling, and the Celtics are down as you and I speak. The Celtics are down 1-0 to the Sixers with that game coming up shortly after we get off this pod. And that the Bucks aren't even in this conversation. There's a lot for them to unpack and for all of us, I guess, to unpack. I'm still not sure what the hell happened.
So it's interesting because as talking to people that cover the league, and I think from the people that I spoke to more on a national level, everyone, even when the Bucks were down 2-1 or down 3-1, the conversations I was having, they're like, it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yes.
And I was kind of sitting there thinking something just does not feel right. There seems something off here. Now, they did win in game 4, in game 5, 6 of the 8 quarters very, very comfortably. And then both games followed a similar path. But you spoke about the people want to say parity. I just want to say the unpredictability of this year's NBA and all these teams. This wasn't your Detroit Pistons from 2019 when the Bucks swept the 8th seed and beat them by about 45 points every single game. It wasn't your traditional 8 seed. So where do you think, and not wanting to rub salt into the wound of the Bucks fans, but it's a conversation. Where do you think this lies historically? Because it just doesn't happen very often.
Well, there's the obvious part, right? It doesn't happen very often. This is only the 6th time an 8 has upset a 1, and only the 4th time since we went to the best of 7 first round, and the first time since 2012. So even then, 8 beating a 1 in the NBA playoffs. It last happened in 2012. That was the Sixers over the Bulls, and that was Derrick Rose blowing out his ACL. And so there was a reason, a very specific reason for that upset. So you throw that one out and you get 2011 Memphis over San Antonio. You get 2007, the We Believe Warriors over the Mavericks. And then you got to go back to the best of 5 first rounds, 99 with the Knicks over the Heat and 94 with the Nuggets over the Sonics. That's it. End of list. And some of those had specific circumstances, and 2 of those were best of 5, where your margin for error is simply lower. And one of those, the Knicks over the Heat in 99, was at the end of a lockout season where everything was wacky, right? There was a 50-game season compressed into a couple of months. I'm not throwing out asterisks necessarily. I'm just saying circumstances, right? Even the We Believe Warriors over the Mavericks, there was something just very unique about the way that Warriors team was built. They were, it was just a different kind of group, and it just presented a bad matchup for the Mavericks. If you're asking me to slot in this Bucks upset historically, this might be the worst one. The worst version of a 1 losing to an 8. Like, this might be the worst upset in first round NBA history, because there were circumstances for several of these other examples. And in none of these other examples was the team that went down the defending champion, or a recent champion, not defending champion, but recent champion, right? The Bulls hadn't accomplished anything when they go down to the Sixers. The Spurs were, a few years removed from their last title. The Mavericks hadn't accomplished anything yet. The Heat in 99 hadn't accomplished anything. The Sonics in 94. Like, none of these teams had a player. I mean, a lot of them had great players, to be clear. Giannis is a 2-time MVP who has been in the MVP, high in the MVP final tally in the years that he hasn't won over the last few. So you're talking about the guy who's arguably the best player in the game, one of the top players at minimum, and a team that just won a title 2 years ago, and they're losing in the first round to an absolutely depleted Heat team that had no offensive firepower to speak of, at least that we thought. This might be the worst upset ever. I don't want to get hyperbolic and all, first takey, but that's what it looks like to me at a glance. It's still hard to explain. And the optics are really bad. And sorry, Giannis, and I know you and I will get to this, Kane, but yes, it was a failure.
So we did at least discuss the idea that because the Bucks are in an interesting position with the flexibility of the roster, with the head coach, if you're going to lose, maybe you need to at least have a loss where everyone sits back and says, okay, we need to have a deeper look at this. Nothing's masked over, because you look at this second round series with the Knicks, and the Bucks probably would have been heavy favorites. No point talking about it, but they would have cruised through what we thought was an easier path to the conference finals. When you get eliminated in the first round, it's worth investigating every possible path to upgrade, to change, to freshen things up. It's been 5 years for the Bucks. So I want to ask you about Mike Budenholzer and this roster. After I talk about eBay Motors, our friends over there, for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you'll get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items apply. Exclusions apply. All right, you mentioned the Giannis. So let's get into this. And I've discussed, and it's a press conference, it's been everywhere. It's been on Australian radio constantly. It's been making it to Europe with some of the bigger soccer head coaches. It's been a crazy reaction to a press conference. Now, we obviously discussed it on this show. I've been stuck in the middle of thinking that covering sports and the individuals has been going down a nastier path, it feels like, in recent times. I think it's kind of the world we live in. But at the same time, we are talking about sports, and I think it's okay to look at a team and say, if you got the best record in the NBA and you get eliminated in historic circumstances, you failed to reach expectations. How have you taken it in?
Yeah, so one, it's unfortunate that Ted Lasso is ending, because this would have been a really great thing to incorporate in a future season, much as they incorporated a version of Allen Iverson's practice rant. So let me take this from the positive view first. I love what Giannis said. I absolutely love what he said, because we do get carried away. We do get hyperbolic in the way that we talk about sports. And that's fans and media, like, passions run high. And I get all of that. And I do think that sports, by definition, there is a binary, right? Like, there's a scoreboard. There are wins and losses. And when you win, you're a success. And when you lose, you're a failure. It doesn't mean that your entire life is a failure. It's not a judgment. It's just a textbook definition. You failed, and there's a spectrum here, right? There's all different levels of this. The Cleveland Cavaliers lost in the first round, but I consider their season a success, because the Cleveland Cavaliers hadn't been in the playoffs in a long time, and they hadn't done anything in the postseason without LeBron in like 1,000 years. So here they are, a new LeBron-less version of the Cavaliers that has finally rebuilt itself and become respectable and gotten, just a lot of really good players together. They have their best, non-LeBron season in decades. They lost in the first round, but they're a 4 seed losing to a 5 seed, which is, 4 and 5s are basically the same team. Their season was still a success. The Sacramento Kings, playoffs for the first time in 17 years, lose in the first round. And it's an upset of sorts, because there are 3 losing to a 6, but the Warriors are defending champions and are not your usual 6 seed. The Sacramento Kings and the Cleveland Cavaliers had successful seasons, in my view. That's not me being Pollyannish or overly charitable. That's not giving out participation trophies. It's looking at the context of their seasons and of their franchises and saying, given where you've been, this was a great step forward. Giannis talked about steps. It's all steps. Yeah, for the Sacramento Kings and Cleveland Cavaliers, this season was an important step for those teams, and they're both young and on the way up and have more room to keep improving and learn from this first round loss and take that into next season and try to advance further next spring. The Bucks are not the Kings and the Cavaliers, though. The Bucks are a team that won the championship 2 years ago, that had the best record in the NBA this season, that has arguably the best player in the NBA, and they're not supposed to lose in the first round to an 8 seed, period. So the context of these things matters. So is it a failure? Yes, in the most basic terms, it's a failure. And I would guess, and I don't like to try to mind read fans or tell them what they should think, but I'm going to guess if you could poll all Bucks fans, you'd probably get a 99% return on, yes, the season was a failure. I'm guessing Bucks fans are pretty upset still about seeing their team lose in this fashion, given the reasonable high expectations, right? These weren't like unreasonable expectations. They were supposed to go to the finals. It was supposed to be between them and the Celtics to win the East. And, if they'd gotten to the conference finals, I would venture to say that Eric Name and no one else would have asked Giannis, was this season a failure? If they'd gotten at least to the conference finals or gotten to the finals and lost or whatever. It's the fact that they were upset in the first round. So I love what Giannis said because I thought it was healthy. I think from a psychological standpoint, from just a perspective standpoint, to put this in the context of everything is steps and we learn from yes, from a life perspective, that is true. And he has I've always thought Giannis has a very healthy way of interpreting and internalizing and contextualizing sport and his place in this sport. He's got a much healthier outlook, I think, than a lot of people. We often lionize Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant for the whole killer mentality thing, but there's an aspect of that that's a little bit psychotic at times. Yeah. The kind of the winning isn't everything, it's the only thing mentality, the win at all costs mentality, the drive so hard that it's to the exclusion of everything else, that it kind of can warp your worldview, can warp your relationships with your teammates. Like, there were consequences for the way that those guys approached the game. And they're, you know, I'm not saying it makes them bad people, but like sometimes that stuff's a little over the edge. I appreciate Giannis's more nuanced perspective on this. But it doesn't mean it wasn't a failure. It simply was. And again, it doesn't mean he personally is a failure. It's not a value judgment, but so I definitely see this from all sides. The question was absolutely fair. It shouldn't have ever been even remotely controversial. And it opened the door for Giannis to be able to push back on a notion that everybody else was going to be gravitating toward. And I think that's a really important part of this too, when people debate like whether it was a reasonable question or not. Baked into that question is the fact that every single person, media, fans, everybody who saw the Bucks lose in the first round are going to consider it a failure. So implicit in the question was, hey, we're all going to view this as a failure. Do you agree with that? And what Giannis is saying is, no, I don't. And his response was totally reasonable. And people can disagree with his response too. But the question was fair. The response was really thoughtful. That's where we are. And on some level, he also knows, yeah, obviously everybody's really disappointed, and disappointment and failure are kind of related. So he knows that they have to figure this out and do some, probably some restructuring of sorts this offseason.
Yeah. And he did go on, and this obviously gets lost. And you're well aware that later on in the press conference, he said, this was my worst postseason ever. And he also said, this is going to burn me all summer long. So he actually went on and spoke about the disappointment. So this is a 5-year stretch for the Milwaukee Bucks. I always get accused in this show being too positive, too optimistic. But if you look at the 5-year period, I think if you're a Milwaukee Bucks fan, this has been the best period unless you're going back to the 80s, obviously in some of those teams there back in the 70s. But 5 years, but it's 5 years under Bud. 3 of those years, you're the number one seed and you don't get to the NBA finals. You only have one title while you have got Giannis entering his prime and now in his prime. We've discussed, obviously, and it was honestly gut-wrenching over the weekend, everything that's gone on a personal level with Mike Budenholzer, but it's obviously going to be a decision that the franchise needs to make at the head coaching spot, particularly because it is going to be tough to make personnel changes with the roster. How do you view the last 5 years, or how should it be viewed with Mike Budenholzer, and how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, this is another one of those areas where it's a lot of eye of the beholder. So I'm not going to tell Bucks fans that they should be, happy with, disappointed with, anything else. But look, the 30,000 foot perspective, it's a successful run. It's if you think of the NBA in 5-year terms, 5-year cycles, which is kind of what it is these days with as much movement as there is. If in the course of a 5-year span, you have made a bunch of deep playoff runs and won a championship, you've been a success, because not that many other teams have won championships, period. And the Bucks hadn't won one in a very, very long time. Any team that's good enough to be among the favorites year in, year out, by definition, it's going to be a disappointment every time they don't make the finals and don't win a championship, right? If you've got the potential to, then we expect you to on some level. And certainly a fan base expects you to. It goes back to something else Giannis said when he was alluding to Jordan. Would Jordan, are the 9 seasons he didn't win a championship failures? Michael Jordan would probably say yes, because that's the way he's wired. I would say no, that's a little unreasonable. You can't expect to win it every single year. But I think the Bucks obviously were expected to get back there and to win more than just the one. But Giannis is still in his prime. Like, this is not over yet. The Budenholzer era might be. We'll see. The Giannis, Middleton, Lopez, Drew Holiday version of this might be over. We'll see. But Giannis, as long as he doesn't, and to this point, he has not been following the path of other superstars of this era and saying, I've hit a wall. It's time to go somewhere else. As long as he's willing to stick it out there, Bucks will figure out a way to restructure around him. And I think they'll probably get to another finals or several. I think they'll probably win another championship at some point. But there's so much luck involved in this sport too. Injury luck, lottery luck, there's just happenstance. And, every year now, because we spend way too much time analyzing this stuff, every year now it's, the Warriors had an easier path last year because, the Mavericks ended up knocking out the Suns and this and that, whatever. And, the Cavaliers, they only won it because Draymond got suspended, or, the Warriors only won it the first time because Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving. Like, we do this to death. The fact is, this kind of stuff happens every single season. There's always versions of this. And it does take some luck. The people who have won a bunch of championships will be the first people to tell you that. The Warriors, the only reigning dynasty, will be the first to tell you that. Bob Meyer says it all the time. Steve Kerr says it all the time. I'm sure Steph and Draymond have said it too. That's just the way it goes. So if you've gone through a 5-year cycle where you won a championship and you're one of the handful of teams that got to win one, congratulations. You're a success. The era was a success. But this era is not over yet, because the era will be however long Giannis is a Milwaukee Buck, possibly till he retires, whenever that might be. So yeah, I'm judging it in that way. It doesn't mean that there weren't some disappointments along the way, but winning a championship is really hard, and they got one.
All right. So one of the big questions you talk about, guys that have been with Giannis since the start, is going to be Khris Middleton. I want to ask you how spooked you are about what we've seen over the last 24 months. First, I'll get to BetterHelp, our sponsor of the show today. It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you, and you never take a moment to think about what you need for yourself. But we all spend our time giving. It can leave us feeling stretched, thin, and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find a more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. The best thing about it is it's all online, so you don't need to be sitting in a waiting room, bumping into someone all the typical things that people worry about. It's online. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Khris Middleton, another one that I think, and I'm constantly complaining about it on this show, gets a bad rap from his section of his own fan base. But he's had a tremendous run in Milwaukee thus far. $40 million player option that he'll make a decision on. And the Bucks could potentially extend him. But he played around 30 regular season games this year. Was on a minutes restriction for the majority of those. In fact, he didn't get over 34 minutes until the postseason. But then once he got there, defensively, listen, it wasn't great. But it wasn't great for many Bucks players trying to defend Jimmy Butler, though, let's say that. But he put up 24 points a game, 47% from the field, 40% from three, 87% from the free throw line. He was an efficient scorer, the best scorer that the Bucks had in this first round series. But there is concern with these mounting injuries, whether it's the knee, the wrist, everything in between. How concerned would you be about a longish, a multi-year extension on big money for Khris Middleton?
I'd be concerned for sure. He turns 32 in August, and sure, we are in an era where NBA players' longevity is being extended, where all the developments in sports science and training and nutrition and year-round training and everything that they do means that, unlike in the old days where 32, especially for a guard, you're any given day you might just fall off a cliff, right? Like you lose it, and that little bit of quickness that you had, that little burst, the lift that you need on your shot just goes. And it's not the case automatically anymore. Guys can be playing at a really high level much deeper into their 30s. So I don't mean to write him off based on age alone, but he's 32. You mentioned him only playing 33 games this year. he only played 66 last season. He's had a lot of injuries over the last, however many years. His 3-point percentage this season plummeted to 315. That's really bad for Khris Middleton. And look, it's in a small sample size and coming back from injury with minutes restrictions and everything else. So maybe it's an outlier, but still alarming. I think the other thing in this discussion though is that's important is it's rare in this league to have an extended period of high level success contending for titles without all-star level talent. And Khris Middleton has made a few all-star teams, and Jrue Holiday has made a couple. So these guys are like whatever, part-time all-stars, however you want to classify this. There are perennial all-stars, and there are guys who sometimes make an all-star team and are good enough, but aren't at the level where you can just pencil them in every year. And the Bucks won their championship and have been a great team with an ensemble approach around an MVP. Now that's become more the norm lately, to be honest. Kawhi Leonard won a championship with Kyle Lowry, another kind of part-time all-star. Pascal Siakam, another guy I would consider more of in the part-time category. Steph won it all last year with, Draymond and Clay being a slightly lesser version of themselves. In particular, Clay coming back from those two devastating injuries. So that was more of an ensemble approach, even in the Warriors' latest championship. So it's possible. It's just hard to sustain if you don't have high-level talent. And Middleton and Jrue Holiday are both really, really good players. And the ensemble approach there has worked because they were the right fit and they brought the right balance of, defensive chops and tenacity and shot making on the other end and some playmaking. They could both handle the ball. I don't know how many more years you can get out of that combination. And on top of that, so Drew's getting up there in years again for a guard, especially. Brook Lopez is in his mid-30s. Brook Lopez is a free agent also. So if you're just running it back, I don't know how much more you can squeeze out of this group based on age and injury history. They work really well together. It is a very well calibrated supporting cast around a supreme player in Giannis. But man, this is a dicey offseason for them in that regard. And I don't envy John Horst and their ownership group and trying to figure out what's the right path and what's the right price if you're bringing back Middleton, what's the right price if you're bringing back Brook Lopez.
Well, I mean, Brook Lopez, and to me at least, it was his best season he's had since Brooklyn. And he did that at 34, coming off back surgery. And now it doesn't seem like he's the type of guy the Bucks can afford to lose. You don't just have Brook Lopez coming in with the lack of flexibility the Bucks have. One last quick one. Now, this is without notice, so I have to, I'll apologize for this. But one more before we wrap it up. How did you view the Jae Crowder situation? Because he's come out after the postseason and he clearly wasn't happy. I don't think anyone is surprised by the fact that he wasn't happy. But he's another free agent now. He said, I'm happy to come back. I love the guys. That might be a coaching situation. I'm not sure. But that was the one investment they made. And not only did he play a minimal role in the postseason, he played no role as they were getting torched by the type of player that you would think they brought Jae Crowder in to play on. Yes, exactly.
Baffling. I would just say, look, Jae Crowder, as valuable as he is as a 3-and-D guy and as good as he's been at his peak over the last 5 years, whatever, he does seem to find a new home every year or every couple of years. That might mean something. I'm just, I don't mean to cast vague aspersions, and I'm not alluding to anything that I know that I'm not saying. I'm just saying I've seen this happen a lot in this league where somebody seems really good and somehow for whatever reason, no matter how valuable they are, they seem to wear out their welcomes really quickly. Maybe that's baked into this one. Jae Crowder, I still don't understand what Jae Crowder and the Suns were doing all season with this whole standoff where he doesn't want to be there. So they're just paying him to not play. A team that really, even before they made the trade for Kevin Durant, they were kind of, I don't want to say shorthanded, but they could have used some extra depth. They could have used another 3-and-D wing, and they just let him not play for months while trying to trade him fruitlessly. And then eventually he ends up on the Bucks for 5 second-round picks, and they don't play him in the playoffs. Maybe he was out of shape. maybe, or maybe he was not quite in good enough shape. Maybe he just wasn't there long enough to build up enough trust with Bud. Maybe it's something else. I don't know. It was a very strange way for his season to end, and a very strange decision by them to not play a guy that they put so much of an investment in. And look, second round picks are second round picks, right? Like, I think on average, maybe like 2 out of 30 second round draftees per year actually have decent NBA careers. Like, it's a really low number. So, but they are chips. They are trading chips. And once you've traded them, then you don't have them to trade for the next potential Jae Crowder, right? So it does mean something that they gave those away for a player who didn't play at the most critical time, and you might let walk as a free agent in the offseason.
I think it's fair to say that was a trade that didn't work out for anyone by the time this season came to a close. Hey, that's the way it works sometimes. Howard, it's been a pleasure. And I should say this, you accommodated me with the timing as well, because I refused to get up in the middle of the night. So I appreciate.
Nor should you have. I'm not worth getting up in the middle of the night just to talk about the Bucks for half an hour. That would be a completely unreasonable expectation. No, happy to do it. Good seeing you. Good chatting. And hopefully the next time we do this, it will be under happier circumstances for the Bucks.
No doubt. At Howard Beck, if you're not already following Howard on Twitter, and you actually just scroll through the Twitter timeline. He's doing a bunch of shows around the league. It's really fun to listen to, fascinating to listen to, and a bunch of other stuff all over the place at the moment. But we appreciate the time, and we'll catch up with you soon. For the listeners, we'll be back tomorrow. We probably need to start diving into some of the financial stuff we discussed today. It's fascinating. There's plenty to talk about. We'll catch you all tomorrow.